When we talk about operating systems, most people immediately think of Windows or macOS. These are the platforms that dominate the mainstream, the ones that almost everyone has at some point used or interacted with. Yet for a growing number of users, Linux represents something profoundly different. It's not just an alternative, it's an experience that feels more personal. That sense of personal connection comes from several intertwined factors, ranging from design philosophy to user freedom, customization, and even community involvement. To truly understand why Linux can feel more personal than Windows or macOS, we have to unpack what personal computing really means in today's digital landscape. The first element that makes Linux feel personal is the sheer level of control it offers. When you use Windows or macOS, you're largely following a path that has been predetermined by the companies that design these systems. Microsoft and Apple decide which features are added, which interfaces you interact with, and often which limitations you must accept. You can tweak settings, yes, but there are hard boundaries. Certain system behaviors are immutable. Certain changes are discouraged or hidden, and the core of the system remains opaque. Linux, by contrast, is designed with transparency and configurability at its core. Every element, from the kernel to the desktop environment to the window manager, is accessible and modifiable. This gives users a sense of agency that is hard to replicate elsewhere. When you can literally control what your operating system does under the hood, it naturally starts to feel like your own creation rather than a product you simply use. Customizability is the most immediate expression of this personal connection. Linux allows you to choose your desktop environment, your window manager, even the way your system boots. You can opt for something simple and minimal like i3 or OpenBox, or something visually rich and feature-laden like KDE Plasma or GNOME. You can change themes, icons, fonts, animations, and behaviors. You can even create your own scripts that automate routine tasks or adjust system behavior. In essence, the computer becomes a canvas. Unlike Windows or macOS, where you are mostly limited to choosing a wallpaper or rearranging your icons, Linux lets you sculpt the user experience to match your workflow, aesthetic preference, and mental model. This level of personalization is not superficial. It permeates the way you interact with your device every single day. Another aspect that makes Linux feel personal is its philosophy of modularity. In Windows or macOS, the operating system is monolithic in many ways. Key components are bundled together, and altering one element often means compromising another or running into limitations enforced by the system itself. Linux breaks the OS into modules, allowing you to swap out parts without affecting the whole. You can change your file manager without touching the desktop environment, switch display servers, or even run different shells in parallel. This modularity isn't just a technical feature, it reinforces the idea that your computer can be shaped to your needs. You can build something that is uniquely yours, not something that conforms to a mass-market template. The open-source nature of Linux is another critical factor in its personal appeal. Open-source software invites participation, inspection, and modification. Users aren't just passive consumers. They can read the code, contribute fixes, propose improvements, or fork a project to create something entirely new. This participatory model fosters a relationship with the software that goes beyond usage. You feel like you're part of an ecosystem, rather than just a customer. Knowing that you can directly influence the tools you rely on gives a sense of ownership that is impossible to achieve on closed platforms. Even if you never touch the code, the fact that it's there, visible, and accessible changes the way you perceive the system. There's a sense of trust and agency that underpins the experience. Linux also excels in the way it respects privacy and avoids unnecessary intrusion. Both Windows and macOS have gradually incorporated telemetry, cloud syncing, and data collection into the core of their systems. Even if users can limit these features, the defaults often prioritize data gathering over user choice. Linux, on the other hand, defaults to local control. There are no hidden telemetry services, no mandatory data uploads, no tracking baked into the operating system. This respect for the user's space and information creates an environment where you can feel safe and truly in charge. That security and autonomy is deeply personal. It reinforces the idea that your computer belongs to you, not to a corporation or service provider. The sense of community surrounding Linux amplifies this personal connection. Unlike proprietary systems, Linux users are often deeply engaged with each other, sharing tips, scripts, themes, and customizations. Forums, IRC channels, subreddits, and Discord communities are filled with users helping one another optimize, personalize, and troubleshoot their systems. This collaborative environment fosters a sense of belonging and identity. When you customize your Linux setup, you're often inspired by others' configurations or contribute your own to the community. The interaction isn't transactional, it's relational. You are part of a living ecosystem, and your contributions can influence the experience of others. That social dimension adds a layer of personal meaning that goes far beyond the mere functionality of an operating system. Performance optimization is another way Linux feels personal. On Linux, users often tailor their systems to their hardware and workflow. Because the OS can be stripped down or augmented based on need, it can be finely tuned to be fast, efficient, and responsive. Windows and macOS, while polished, are designed to operate well on a broad range of hardware, which often means compromises in efficiency or responsiveness. Linux allows the tech-savvy user to squeeze every bit of performance from their machine, which creates a more intimate relationship with the hardware. When your system reacts instantly to your commands because you configured it that way, it feels alive, almost like an extension of your mind rather than a generic tool. Scripting and automation contribute further to personalization. Linux offers a variety of shells and scripting languages that let users automate repetitive tasks. Whether it's Bash, ZSH, Python, or Lua, users can craft small scripts or complex workflows that reduce friction in their daily tasks. Over time, these scripts become deeply personal extensions of the user's habits and needs. Windows has PowerShell, and macOS has Automator and AppleScript, but Linux offers a breadth of choice and transparency that allows for a more seamless and granular integration into daily life. The ability to modify behavior at such a detailed level makes the experience unique and custom to the individual. Another subtle but significant factor is the diversity of Linux distributions. Each distribution carries its own philosophy, package management system, and user experience. Ubuntu emphasizes accessibility and stability. Fedora leans toward cutting-edge software. Arch Linux prioritizes user control and learning, and distributions like Gentoo or NixOS offer complete configurability from the ground up. Choosing a distribution is a personal decision that shapes your interaction with the OS for months or years. Unlike Windows, which is essentially the same everywhere, or macOS, which offers only incremental variations across devices, Linux allows users to select a base system that aligns with their priorities, creating a sense of agency from the very beginning. Linux also encourages learning and self-discovery in ways that Windows and macOS typically do not. Because the OS exposes much of its internals, users are often prompted to understand what is happening behind the scenes. This might involve configuring system files, learning terminal commands, or compiling software from source. While this can seem intimidating to newcomers, it creates a deep sense of competence and familiarity over time. Using Linux often means learning the language of the system itself, which naturally fosters ownership. Your relationship with your OS becomes educational, developmental, and deeply personal. Each tweak, each customization, each solution to a problem reinforces the feeling that this machine is uniquely yours. The aesthetics of Linux personalization are also worth mentioning. Unlike macOS, which has a very rigid visual style, or Windows, which offers limited theming options, Linux allows you to control almost every aspect of the interface. You can create a desktop that is minimal and distraction-free, or one that is vibrant and information-rich. You can emulate other OS experiences if you wish, or forge something entirely original. You can have custom widgets, launchers, and notifications. The desktop becomes not just a tool but an expression of identity. For many users, the aesthetic choice is a reflection of personality, creativity, and workflow preference. There's a subtle satisfaction in knowing that every icon, color, and layout choice was made intentionally by you. Furthermore, the package management system in Linux fosters a sense of personal efficiency. Whether you use apt, pacman, DNF, or another system, installing, updating, and removing software becomes a precise, controllable process. You aren't at the mercy of an app store that curates and restricts choices. You have the freedom to explore repositories, compile software from source, or even build your own packages. This ability to control your software ecosystem directly affects how personal the OS feels because you aren't just consuming. You are actively shaping it. Accessibility to legacy hardware and old systems adds another dimension. Linux often runs well on machines that Windows and macOS no longer support. This means users can keep old hardware alive, customize it for modern tasks, and continue using a device that might otherwise be discarded. In doing so, Linux users form long-term meaningful relationships with their hardware. There's a sense of continuity, a preservation of personal investment, and the ability to mold technology to fit personal needs rather than the other way around. Even the philosophy of choice in Linux contributes to its personal feel. There is no right way to do things. Users can choose their file systems, their init systems, their shells, their window managers, and their workflows. This contrasts sharply with Windows and macOS, which implicitly encourage conformity. On Linux, the system adapts to the user, rather than the user adapting to the system. That inversion is psychologically significant. It turns the act of using a computer into a creative and expressive endeavor rather than a passive one. Another key aspect is community-driven software design. Many Linux applications are created by and for users who actively communicate their needs and desires. Feature requests are often quickly implemented. Bugs are fixed collaboratively, and there is a feedback loop that feels direct and responsive. When you use an open-source app and interact with its developers, you become part of the evolution of the tool itself. This is a stark contrast to proprietary platforms, where feedback is filtered, delayed, and often ignored. The feeling that your input matters reinforces the personal connection. Privacy is also intertwined with personal identity on Linux, with increasing concerns about surveillance, tracking, and corporate influence. Having an OS that prioritizes your control over data is more than a functional advantage, it's personal empowerment. Users can encrypt their drives, manage permissions granularly, and run services without fear of hidden telemetry. This respect for personal space contributes to the psychological sense that Linux is yours in a way Windows and macOS often are not. The terminal environment deserves special mention. While not inherently necessary for all Linux users, the terminal allows unparalleled interaction with the system. Users who embrace the terminal often develop muscle memory and workflows that are entirely unique to their configuration. Aliases, scripts, and environment variables become extensions of their habits. This creates an intimate, almost symbiotic relationship with the machine, something that graphical interfaces in closed systems rarely provide to the same depth. Finally, the Linux ethos itself promotes personal responsibility and ownership. The culture around Linux emphasizes learning, experimentation, and self-reliance. Mistakes are common, but they are learning opportunities. Users are encouraged to understand their systems deeply and solve problems themselves. This fosters not only technical skill, but also a sense of stewardship over your digital environment. That sense of responsibility reinforces the personal connection because the system truly belongs to you in a way that prepackaged, corporate-driven platforms cannot replicate. In conclusion, Linux feels more personal than Windows or macOS because it empowers users in ways those systems cannot. From deep customizability and modularity to open-source transparency, community engagement, and respect for privacy, Linux provides both the tools and the philosophy for users to shape their computing environment into something uniquely their own. Every tweak, every configuration, every script contributes to an operating system that is not just functional but reflective of the individual who uses it. This is why Linux isn't just an alternative, it's an experience of ownership, creativity, and personal expression that makes the act of using a computer profoundly intimate. Unlike Windows and macOS, which are largely uniform experiences crafted by corporations, Linux offers a canvas on which users can paint their digital identity, turning a simple machine into an extension of themselves. The feeling of personal connection is not universal, it requires engagement, curiosity, and sometimes a willingness to learn, but for those who embrace it, Linux becomes not just an OS but a companion. Every configuration, every customized workflow, and every community interaction reinforces that sense of ownership and belonging. This is why, for many, Linux transcends utility. It becomes personal, expressive, and empowering in ways that Windows and macOS rarely achieve. And as technology continues to evolve, the ability to own, shape, and personalize your digital life becomes more valuable than ever, making Linux a platform not just of functionality, but of identity, creativity, and personal freedom.